As the deck creaks under the weight of fear, a merchant captain is tied to the mast of his own ship, with his crew forced to watch as the pirate standing before him traces the edge of his cutlass across the captain's face. The punishment isn't necessary or even strategic, it's personal. The pirates watching begin to shift uncomfortably at the unpredictability of the man named Edward Lowe. Once just a thief on the streets of London, Lowe had become a ruthless pirate captain, a man whose early life may have sown the seeds of the brutality that would define him and ultimately lead to his demise. Born in 1690 in Westminster in London, Edward Lowe learnt quickly that survival on the streets demanded violence. Raised in extreme poverty, he moved through the streets like a whisper, with sharp eyes and quick fingers, slipping coins from the pockets of the innocent locals. From a young age, he got involved with pickpocketing gangs and dockside crime. He quickly gained a reputation for his temper, quick to anger and quicker to violence. He was described by those that knew him as a wicked and cruel kid. His involvement with dockside gangs eventually led him across the Atlantic to the American colonies, visiting Boston, one of the most important ports in the British Empire, and there he found a legitimate job as a rigger. By the early 1720s, Lowe joined a crew that was heading for the Gulf of Mexico, where men would go to cut logwood along the coastline. This was relentless work, and in 1721 Edward could take no more, and a dispute erupted between Lowe and his captain, refusing to comply with orders, and like so many times throughout his life, he turned to violence. Upon this dispute, Lowe gathered a small group of men, no more than a dozen, seized the vessel and abandoned his post. There was no plan beyond this moment and no second chances in the open water, but nonetheless, he and his new crew had crossed a line that could not be undone, and out of anger and survival, a pirate crew emerged. A short time after the mutiny in 1721, Edward Lowe crossed paths with established pirate captain George Lowther, who was already operating in the Caribbean. Lowther had a growing pirate crew, and with his experience and plentiful opportunities in the Caribbean, Lowe would join his crew. He started to prove himself quickly, being bold and decisive in action, taking part in raids while learning how a successful pirate operation worked. He learnt how to approach vessels under false colours, how to coordinate attacks, and how to overwhelm enemy crews. Within a matter of months, he was no longer just another member of the crew, and by May of 1722, they captured a vessel known as the Rebecca, and was entrusted with the command of his own ship. With this command, he brought a crew, weapons, and independence, marking the beginning of his rise as a pirate captain. Operating across the Caribbean and the Atlantic, Lowe targeted merchant shipping routes stretching from the West Indies to the east coast of North America and as far as the Azores. In the span of a year, he and his crew captured dozens of vessels, building his wealth and reputation as a top pirate captain. Their operations followed trade routes that exploited the predictable movements of merchant ships whilst avoiding direct confrontations with heavily armed naval forces. The methods he used were effective. Lowe hoisted false flags while approaching unsuspecting ships, relying on speed and surprise before revealing his true intentions at close range. His attacks were efficient and they were mostly designed to overwhelm rather than prolong a conflict. Crews that surrendered quickly were usually spared any extended violence, at least in the early stages of his career. As his success grew, so did his fleet. At his peak, Lowe commanded 2 to 3 ships with as many as 200 men. Coordinating multiple vessels required authority and expertise, and over this period he did it all. Crews followed him on his successful raids, and his reputation grew. By the end of 1722, Edward Lowe was one of the most successful pirate captains operating in the Atlantic. As the time passed and Lowe's notoriety grew, so did his violence, and while he was always a ruthless captain, over time he became much more brutal, something he was always capable of. After capturing a vessel off the trading routes of the Atlantic, the crew on board were disarmed and the cargo was secured. This seemed like a very normal raid for the crew, but the mind of Captain Lowe had other ideas, as he ordered the ship's captain to be brought before him. Everything had been salvaged, there was nothing to negotiate or to ransom, just punishment because he could. The captain was brought before Lowe and his lips were instantly hacked off. and the cruelty didn't end there. He was forced to endure further suffering and humiliation before finally being killed. This sort of incident was not in isolation at all, and in fact they became quite a common theme in the rest of Low's career. Prisoners were mutilated with their ears and noses cut away, and any crews that resisted were subjected to extreme violence. On another occasion, when trying to seize the goods of a merchant vessel, its crew decided that their best course of action was to throw their valuables overboard before Low and his crew could get to them, which absolutely infuriated him. Instead of singling out the captain, he decided to go for the ship's cook on this occasion, killing him on the spot. He then scraped out his heart and roasted it, making sure that those who had seen this gruesome act would spread the word across the world's oceans that Edward Low was not someone you should take lightly, and if you do so, be prepared for the chaos it brings. Word did spread quickly across the Caribbean and the Atlantic trade routes, and pirates alike would recognise his name, not just as a pirate but as something less predictable. Even among pirates, Low didn't follow the same rules, and his unpredictability couldn't be controlled. The violence that had given Low his notoriety over the years, usually directed at captured crews, began to turn inward. Low's temper became increasingly unpredictable, and his own men were beaten, threatened, and in some cases marooned for relatively minor offences. His authority was no longer maintained through leadership, it was out of pure fear, and that fear began to spread. This changed the way his crew fought, and their raids became less efficient. With that brings hesitation, loss of confidence, and a huge amount of doubt over the future of the operation. Having doubts in the captain of your crew meant there were huge risks, which at the very least could cause the loss of income and even the loss of lives. In June of 1723, after an encounter with a Royal Navy ship, Low was forced to flee after one of his captains, Charles Harris, was captured and later executed. It was a significant loss to the crew, and this was a vital point where his position as captain started to weaken. The crew began to fragment, some men were left behind while others joined new crews, and at this point Edward Low was no longer in control of a unified crew, and his pirate career came to an abrupt end. There was never clear evidence of his demise, but the most common story is that Low was eventually captured by the French in the Caribbean, where he was tried and executed on the island of Martinique. The man who had spent years beyond the reach of the authorities was tried, condemned, and ultimately hanged. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.